This is A&M. This is A&M, so I have to be able to howdy. Well, I'm Bobby Yanni, honored dean of the law school. From the time I think we were law school, even the census Wesleyan came into existence. And clearly during the time of A&M, we have thought of it as really a community asset, a community resource, an institution that is here to advance and engage the issue from this in our community. My colleague, Rich Moran, who will for a moment, is really exemplary of that. She's done that for her career with the education law program that we are, I'm getting signaled. That we are here kind of under the auspices of Rachel's program. It really reflects in many ways exactly those values of trying to engage critical issues of the day. We have an incredible panel representing different perspectives and positions on the issues of the day. And again, as I was telling to the senator a moment ago, it's hard to imagine one that is more critical to the future of our community than this one. So I'm incredibly honored to have Rachel as my colleague. I should mention that she is now, she was already a distinguished colleague. Now she's an even more distinguished colleague. Texas A&M University recognizes a very small number of faculty as university distinguished professors. And so Rachel was just selected a week ago as one of those. We'll join me in recognizing her. But really to have all of you here to engage this topic and really to our distinguished panelists. So thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in the topic. And let me invite Professor Mann up to the podium.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. We're very excited to host this event, both in person and virtually, so you have other people who are watching from afar. We came to the topic of From the Capitol to the Classroom, the state takeover of Fort Worth ISD, because we thought this was a tremendously important development here locally for our future and for the future of the children who live in this community. And we were very, very fortunate to put together an illustrious group of panelists who I think will give you many perspectives on this issue. Our goal here is to have an informative and constructive dialogue about what is obviously a complex and perhaps controversial issue. Now, before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge some of the folks who are with us today, including our newly elected Senator Taylor Ramett, who has joined us. And let's have a round of applause. Congratulations, Senator. Now, his new office recently opened just down the street from campus, and we're grateful he made time to attend and listen to the perspectives that our panelists and audience members bring to this discussion. So I know he's here to listen and learn, just as all of you are. We have a number of other dignitaries and VIPs joining us today, too numerous to mention, but I do want to express my particular gratitude to educational leaders who are devoting themselves to a deeper understanding of this issue. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the people behind the scenes who have made all of this possible. And I wanted to begin with my research assistants, Lilia Elizondo, Renee Garces, and Ryan Higgins, all students here at Texas A&M University School of Law. They've just done a tremendous job. And what's going to happen during our Q&A is that Renee is going to keep time, but Lilia is going to keep track of the questions on chat so we can pose some questions from our virtual audience. And Ryan will have a roving microphone. He's going to kind of be the Oprah of this event and take your questions. The other two people I want to acknowledge are Kelly Schmidt, my research assistant. She's the reason we have all these lunches today, and Kirsten Evans, who has made sure that everything runs smoothly from your registration to the setup. And we're just very, very fortunate to have these dedicated staff who make these events such a smooth and hopefully for you, interesting and constructive experience. Now I want to turn it over to our moderator, Brent Beasley of Fort Worth Education Partnership. He's going to moderate the discussion, and we'll start with introductions and then get into some moderated questions before we take questions from all of you. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see three, I think, Fort Worth ISD school board members here. Toby Jackson, Michael Ryan, Quentin Phillips. So we're glad that you are here, and I see former County Commissioner Roy Brooks as well, so welcome. I lead the Fort Worth Education Partnership, and we, as Professor Moran and I were discussing earlier, we live in a time when having constructive, open, and nuanced public conversations about complex and difficult subjects is rare, and sometimes it feels impossible. But that's exactly what we're going to do here today, and we have assembled an all-star panel to do that. And so I'm going to ask each of you on the panel to just briefly introduce yourselves. We can just go down the line, starting with Trenace, and then we'll move ahead to the questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Trenace. Can y'all hear me okay? My name is Trenace Dorsey-Hollins. I am the founding director of Parent Shield Fort Worth. We're a parent-led movement here that serves parents in Tarrant County.
Hello, everyone. Domingo Morel, Associate Professor of Political Science and Public Service at NYU. I've been researching state takeovers of local schools for over a decade. I published a book called Takeover, Race, Education, and American Democracy, and really happy to be here in conversation with you all today.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Rincon. I'm an attorney with O'Hanlon, Demerath, and Castillo, but I'm an educator at heart. Started as a school teacher and have been serving Fort Worth ISD communities in the DFW area for the past 10 years and sitting with the board as board counsel for the past 3 years. So thank you for having us here.
I'm Samantha Stimson. I am a Fort Worth ISD educator. I work at O.D. Wyatt High School. I'm their English department chair as well as their campus technology liaison.
All right, thank you all very much. So Ms. Rincon, we'll start with a question directed to you as we kind of establish the foundation for this discussion. For those here who are not familiar with the law about state intervention in Texas, can you talk about just how Fort Worth ISD reached this point of intervention, and then what is the legal basis and legal implications of this?
Sure, thank you. In Texas, the state has statutory authority to intervene in the governance of public school districts when persistent academic underperformance occurs at a campus. That authority comes from the Texas Education Code, primarily Chapter 39A, which governs accountability and intervention. Under this statutory framework, the TEA evaluates campuses annually through the state accountability system. When a campus receives 5 unacceptable academic ratings, the Commissioner of Education is required by statute to intervene. The Commissioner's options at that point are limited. The statute directs the Commissioner to either close the campus that generated the ratings or appoint a board of managers to govern the school district. That is the law. That is specifically what the law requires the Commissioner to do. This statutory structure reflects a policy decision by the legislature. It places ultimate responsibility on the state to ensure that campuses serving students meet minimum academic performance standards. The situation involving Fort Worth ISD arose because the former Glencrest 6th campus, now currently part of the Leadership Academy at Forest Oak, accumulated what TEA determined to be 5 consecutive years of unacceptable academic performance under the state accountability system. When the 2023 accountability ratings were finalized, the Commissioner concluded that the statutory threshold for mandatory intervention had been met. The district disagreed with that conclusion and challenged how the accountability years were counted and whether the statutory trigger had actually occurred. That disagreement led to current legal proceedings, which just finished on March 9th. And I'm going to go through that a little bit to continue with the legal framework. So what is the story of the consecutive failing scores? Because the legal dispute in this case centered on, so you'll forgive me, I am going to be speaking in present tense and we are in fact in past tense. The legal dispute in the case centered on whether the 5-year trigger occurred and which remedy should follow.
The early accountability ratings, the campus had struggled academically for several years. In 2016, it received improvement required, the same in 2017 and 2018, which continued that pattern of unacceptable performance. During the COVID era, during the pandemic, TEA paused traditional accountability ratings. Instead, campuses received not rated designations. So in 2020 and in 2021, the campus was not rated under the declared state of disaster. In 2022, the campus was not rated as part of a partnership, which I'll go into just a little bit more. Then the ratings resumed in 2023, where the campus received an F rating. When TEA issued the 2023 rating, the agency concluded that the campus had accumulated the 5 consecutive unacceptable ratings, therefore triggering the mandatory intervention under the statute, as I explained previously. TEA maintained that the 5 years ran from 2016 through 2019 and then in 2023. Fort Worth ISD saw it a little bit differently. Fort Worth ISD acknowledged that the 2016, 2017, and 2018 ratings were in fact the IR ratings, and then a failure rating of 2018-19. However, there was the pause of 2020 and 2021 that the district agreed upon, and then the pause of the 2021-22 school year. I have a graphic in front of me. That's how I keep track of how we were arguing this point, because it was one of the main, if not the main point. The dispute comes in the 22-23 year, where the district maintained that the campus was under the partnership, having joined the Leadership Academy Network with Texas Wesleyan, which is allowed by law under SB 1882. They're considered SB 1882 partnerships. The district, we argue that at that point, the campus had a 2-year pause as allowed by law, which included the 2022-23 school year. However, as we later found, the fact that the campus had received funding for that school year under that partnership retroactively, so it did not receive it in the 22-23 school year, but had received it later on, that became one of the factors that then turned in our proceedings before the SOA, or the administrative law judges. So just kind of going back to the framework now, in 2023, in October of 2025, the commissioner issued a notice of intent to appoint a board of managers and conservator for the Fort Worth ISD. This letter initiated the state intervention process. So why was there a delay? Well, in 2023, when the ratings would have come out, there was a lawsuit called the A through F lawsuit, handled by a couple of attorneys, but specifically by Kevin O'Hanlon of O'Hanlon, Demerath, Castillo. So that's one of my bosses. With the understanding that the ratings had changed, and that in essence, the goalposts had been moved while the game was being played. And so that lawsuit caused the 2023 ratings to be delayed. When they came out in 2025, then the school district knew that they in fact were getting the F rating at that campus, which would have been counted 5 years by the commissioner, as evidenced by the letter that came in October informing the district of such. Following the commissioner's notice, the district participated in an informal review process, which is part of the legal proceedings. That entailed a meeting with the commissioner and multiple members of his staff, the trustees, some of the trustees. It was a limited number on behalf of Fort Worth ISD that could attend this informal review. We likened it to a grievance hearing where the district was allowed to make an argument, but it was a very informal setting. It was more of a conversation with the commissioner. The trustees had the opportunity to share some of the great things that have been happening in Fort Worth ISD, especially since the hiring of the current superintendent, Dr. Karen Molinar. And so that time was legally allowed by the commissioner through this informal hearing, and then a decision was made by the commissioner. And on November 6th, the commissioner issued a final decision from that review and affirmed the appointment of the Board of Managers and appointed a conservator to oversee the district. Am I still good on my
I
time?
think we're about done with time. So yeah, if you could wrap up.
Yeah, let me just, then we get into the appeal at the State Office of Administrative Hearings. At that point, there were 3 administrative law judges assigned to this case. This is a case that had not occurred with other school districts. So when you think about takeovers, HISD was the main one that had been taken over. They sued the TEA. That no longer was an option for the district, given some changes in the legislature and some statutes. And then the second school district that was taken over, La Jolla ISD in the Valley, that was for financial and other reasons. So it was not exactly like the Fort Worth ISD process. So then we get into the judges. With the judges, immediately TEA filed a motion for summary disposition. After the pre-hearing conference with the ALJs, we had a hearing on January 22nd in front of them for them to make a decision on the motion for summary disposition. At that point, the ALJs, having not gone through this process before, asked us to also be prepared to discuss the merits of the case. And about a month later, we received notice from, actually less than a month later, the ALJs issued the order granting TEA's motion for summary disposition. Therefore, there would be no actual hearing. And on March 9th, the administrative law judges issued a final decision, again affirming the commissioner's right to appoint the Board of Managers even though the school was closed in 2023.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Walking through that I was going to say, well, that's really straightforward and simple.
I tried to make it as linear as I could.
Yeah.
That's why I tried to stay to my script.
Yeah. Thank you for walking us through that. Yeah. Ms. Stimson, we want to go to you now. So we've been talking about legal issues. So now we want to talk to you as a teacher. And it's kind of an interesting place for you to be in because the state intervention or takeover hasn't happened yet.
Yep.
And so, the current superintendent are still in place. So I guess what we're asking you is to kind of talk about how the prospect of all this and this process is affecting the classroom,
Yeah.
the school, and then any kinds of other like changes and hopes and fears that
Right.
you and other teachers have.
Well, so as far as the feelings, it's created a lot of confusion. There is a lot of fear in the classrooms, a lot of instability amongst the teachers. Decisions are being made by people who aren't necessarily in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. And so they're not necessarily seeing what the educators are seeing. And so it's removing the autonomy that we used to have. The one size fits all model that we're currently being introduced to is quickly showing us that scaffolding and differentiation is not there for our students. So specifically, we are being told to teach from a very scripted model. We've got PowerPoints that show step by step what the kids are supposed to be doing, not necessarily what they're learning. There's not the scaffolding just isn't there. We're being told what to teach and how to teach it down to the minute and the pacing. Micromanagement, everybody's favorite, is happening even on teams that have consistently met or exceeded expectations in the classroom, especially when it comes to STAR testing. The state's trying to fix problems that don't necessarily exist while ignoring the ones that do. That scripted curriculum that I mentioned doesn't allow for individualized support. So specifically my students that I am responsible for, they have very diverse learning needs. It's not going to be solved by a one-size-fits-all model that we are even currently being asked to implement last minute without a lot of training on either. Students with those learning gaps, the language needs, foundational skills, those deficits are being left behind because of the pacing and how quickly we're supposed to get through a lesson. So teachers are being forced to kind of check boxes and not really hold the kids accountable, as well as being held accountable ourselves with that. Let's see, administration walkthroughs, every teacher's favorite thing. Where the focus is now on performing the objective and not understanding the scaffolding that is required for students to actually master the material. The system demands urgency, but denies the conditions needed for real learning. So right now, even though it hasn't officially happened yet, we are seeing how the curriculum writers for us are trying to adopt the same models that Houston ISD has and implementing it in the classrooms right now. So with those curriculum problems, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from my English department is that the texts that the kids are being asked to read are low rigor. They're poorly aligned with what the students actually need. Teachers cannot plan more than 1 or 2 weeks ahead because of the curriculum that's still being written. So it's not a lump sum. They usually do it like week by week. So we don't know what we're going to be teaching next week because it hasn't been written yet. Which for me as a planner, that's a problem. Not being able to know what material I'm presenting to the kids, what skills that they need to focus on, is not helpful. There's no rationale, there's no training that's being rolled out with this new curriculum either. So as a teacher, there's a lot of panic, like I said, a lot of confusion. As far as the morale, we're seeing a lot of turnover in our department alone right now. We've got 13 English teachers on staff, 3 of which are considered to be long-term subs because we don't have the capacity to find teachers who still want to be in the classroom, that care about the kids. And it's not a matter of not caring about the kids. We do care about the kids. We're just kind of in this weird limbo like everybody else is. The students are being asked to meet standards that they're not really educationally prepared for without the foundational support that they need. A lot, I would say, at least at our campus, even at the senior level, there's a lot of reading intervention that needs to happen and is not happening. So that is a core skill that needs to be occurring. Constant changes create stress, inconsistency, and like I said, confusion for students, as well as the teachers. So, bottom line, according to my little bullet point notes, the takeover, the idea of the takeover has not really improved stability, rigor, or outcomes. It's created a system where teachers are less empowered, students are less supported, and decisions seem to be less thoughtful. Our students deserve a system that recognizes them as individuals, trusts the teacher expertise, and plans with clarity and purpose, not just the ones that prioritize compliance and politics over learning.
How would you say the students have been doing over the last 10 years as far as results? Like, have you been getting the results we want to see out of our kids and now all of a sudden you feel like you're not?
Yes. So I can really only speak to my campus, but I do have some other friends who work at other campuses who have given me some data points as well. so pre-COVID, I definitely saw like the graduating class of 2017 and 2018, like they were on the upward trajectory. They were seeking out higher education. They were going to community colleges and colleges after the fact, not just jumping right into the workforce or going to a trade school. That was pre-COVID. COVID, obviously, we hit a brick wall with that. And then post-COVID, I would say I personally didn't see any increase or accountability until maybe like the class of 2023, 24. I've seen that there has been an upward trajectory in the kids' learning and the rigor, especially with the things that I know Karen, our superintendent currently, has really pushed for. But it's not going to happen overnight. So,
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Morel, so you've studied this from a much broader perspective than, we know a lot about what's happening here in Fort Worth, but you're bringing a broader perspective. So how, in your kind of research, how can a state takeover both positively and negatively impact a school district and a community? And then I think for us, what key factors do you see lead to or hinder positive outcomes for kids?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Listening to Cynthia and Samantha, it's really heartbreaking, to be honest with you. So we have about 30 years of evidence on state takeovers. When I first started to study state takeovers, I really relied on school board meeting minutes and interviewing teachers from that time, the 1980s and early 1990s, in many places like Newark, like Baltimore, and other places that experienced state takeovers. And those board meeting minutes sound exactly like what we're hearing here today. And so the question for me is, why haven't we learned? Right? And part of the reason why we haven't learned is because we think that each and every school district that is experiencing all of these challenges, that they're isolated and that what they're going through is something that is unique to them. And while it is true that Fort Worth ISD, what you've been going through, what you're going to go through, will be unique to you, you share so many different things, so many things with what has been happening across the country, across time. So what are some of the things that we know about state takeovers across time and across districts? So we have about 13,000 school districts in this country. Many of them are struggling, either academically or financially. So if state takeovers were specifically about the act of helping improve school districts that are struggling either academically or financially, we would have a lot of takeovers. I would venture to say thousands of takeovers across this country, but we don't. Takeovers are specifically targeted to a specific community, and those communities are largely Black and Latino communities. So that's the one thing that I think is really important for us to understand. Number two, there is clearly a political and specifically a partisan dynamic here. That in overwhelming number of places where takeovers are experienced, these are led by Republican governors and Republican-led state legislatures, and they're happening in majority what we would call blue cities or Democratic cities, particularly communities of color. That's another factor. And the third, and there's many, but I'm limited on time, so I have to focus on those that I think are most important for this conversation, is that when these takeovers happen, and the elected school board is abolished and replaced with an appointed school board by the state, usually there is like a lot of enthusiasm in the community because they may feel hopeful that something will change. And what we see is like over 100 people apply to these state-appointed positions. And the state, I think rightfully so, would say, look, there's enthusiasm within the community to improve the schools. Look how many applicants we got. And so this happens across districts, across time. But then inevitably something happens. There will inevitably be a collision between the community wants, what the community envisions, the local community envisions for their district, and what the state wants for that district. And so those people who have been appointed by the state, who went through the process of applying and doing all of these things, what do? In many cases, they see themselves as representatives of their community, rightfully so. But what happens when the state says, we're going to close schools, we're going to fire teachers, we're going to cut athletics, we're going to cut music, we're going to close the library, and the community doesn't want that? I'm sorry to tell you, inevitably, that is what's going to happen in Fort Worth ISD. And the reason why I know that is because it's what happens in every single school district that has experienced the takeover. So that representative who believes that they are representing their community, who are they accountable to? They're not accountable to their community. They're accountable to the body that appointed them to be on that board. And there will be a collision. And those people will have a moral and ethical dilemma because they thought they were there to represent their communities. And in fact, they're there to have to represent the voice of the state. And so I mention these things because they're really important for you to understand in terms of context what is about to happen at Fort Worth ISD. And so to the question about when is it that we might, we're out of time.
We're close, so yeah.
Okay, when, so I'll
Yeah, if you want to
briefly on this.
Yeah.
Under those conditions, it's really difficult to say how you can have positive outcomes out of a takeover. Certainly, as Houston ISD did, they looked at New Orleans and saw that, New Orleans had some positive things that come out of the takeover. But again, the data and the history here are pretty clear. New Orleans saw some academic gains after the takeover, and over time it leveled off, and then in some places went down. Houston, it's going to experience the same thing. And in Fort Worth, if this is the path that it goes on, it will encounter the same thing. So I just don't see in any way how a takeover leads to what this community wants, right? I've talked to some people in my brief time here, and again, it's just heartbreaking because what you want for your school district is what every single community across this country has wanted for their school district, and ultimately ends up with disappointment across the board.
All right, thank you. Ms. Dorsey-Hollins, I think you live, did you go to the middle school that we're talking about here? I feel like I've heard you say that in the past, but before I say it, I wanted to check with you if that's true.
So no, I did not.
Okay.
But that is
But
the
you
middle
were
school.
close.
Yes, that's the middle school that's zoned for my
Yes.
children.
Okay, I just wanted to locate you in the community.
That's where my mom went to school though.
Yeah, thank you. How are the parents that you know and work with feeling about all of this now? What are they anxious about? Where do they see opportunities? Love to hear.
For one, just thank you for including parents in this conversation. I feel like parents are often we're the closest to the problem, but often the one that's overseen or not really sought after for our opinion. So thank you for even including parent voices in this conversation. So the first thing is that nobody likes change. Nobody wants to see change. Change scares everybody, but we've been going down this path for years. Like, this is nothing new. The scores for students in Fort Worth ISD have been poor for years and years and years. And it's like, do we just continue to do the same thing and continue to get the same results? That's where change has to be a positive outcome and be sought after as something positive for our kids. Parents are hopeful right now. And I know Domingo, stated what could happen, but parents are hopeful. Parents are considering this as the change that we need to see improvement for our kids. I mean, can we get any worse than where we are? Before this past year, where we have seen growth because of our current superintendent, Dr. Molinar, the numbers for the percentages for students were actually declining. So they weren't getting better. And then I also just want to make a note that, nobody wants to see our local elected leaders lose their power. However, also, I just want to bring up the point that this past election that we had, we didn't have very many candidates running to be our school board members. We didn't have very many people showing up to vote. So are these really, you know, the people that we voted for? The elections did not really, you know, show that. And so we're excited that this could be a change to show improvement. Looking at Houston, Houston is making gains. That's what we want for our kids. I'm not an educator. I don't know, you know, I'm not here to tell teachers how to teach. We're not blaming teachers. We're not blaming our trustees. But as a parent, we want to see our kids improve. We do not have years to continue to just let our kids stagnate and just be at the percentage that they are. If we look at the scores right now, we're barely better than where we were post-COVID, pre-COVID, excuse me. So this for us is a change that we need that could show growth for kids. And that's the main thing. It's not about the adults in the room. It's about kids. And we want to see growth for our kids. And we've not been seeing that in our current situation. So this for us is that light at the end of the tunnel. And it's like, we're here now. So although, again, a lot of the community does not want to see, and our trustees does not want to see their self lose power, we're here. How do we now embrace this as a community and all, you know, row in the same direction for our kids? Because that's who ultimately this matters for.
I think we can go to questions from the audience, and Ryan's going to bring the microphone around, and we've got a little over 20 minutes.
Yeah. This may be a question for Ms. Rincon. Let's talk about the word consecutive legally. This was not 5 consecutive years by my definition of the word consecutive, because 2 of those years, they were not taking scores because of a very disruptive pandemic that had negative impacts on pretty much every public school in the nation. So was there ever any consideration in a legal perspective for not calling those 2 years consecutive and maybe restarting the clock? What does the law say?
I think the law is clear in that the law has asterisks, and although there was a pause for the pandemic, what didn't pause is when you joined the partnership. So the pandemic paused, but it did not pause the consecutiveness of academic rating whenever it was going to be picked up again. Okay. Now, I haven't actually seen the statute recently to say that it actually states all of that. However, that's the asterisk and the understanding, because we have the statute, but then we have all of our procedures and the agency regulations and the things that TEA puts out that would lead a better understanding of what TEA is expecting with those pauses. So I think it was clear that the pandemic was not going to pause the ratings with regard to consecutive years. I think that the legal issue came up more when Fort Worth ISD was part of the membership, and that allows for 2 years pause. It just so happened that it came after 2 years of pause due to the pandemic. And then there's that discrepancy of, well, did we really get that second year pause? Did the district get the second year pause? And then getting money later comes into play. And that's why I think it's asterisks, because you kind of find out a better understanding of the definitions after you've lived it a little bit.
Can I just respond to that too? I think we're talking about the definition of the word consecutive here. But while we're discussing something like that, what we're not talking about is the fact that nobody's arguing that at that school, the kids were learning more during this time. The number of kids at grade level at that school were the same this whole time. It was rated unacceptable every year but one since 2013. So we're talking about 25% or so of the kids meeting grade level standard at that school the whole time. So whatever our definition is of consecutive, nobody's trying to say, well, this shouldn't have happened because the kids were actually really learning well at that school. They were doing well. Nobody's making that argument.
I don't think that's an argument you can make in the structure that exists right now, in the legal structure that exists right now.
But it's not the case.
But it is the case in 23, 24, and 24, 25. So there is nothing in the statute that allows for the progress that has occurred after because of the statute triggering at that point.
Right.
If that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm speaking from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
And that was the question that was written.
If you guys just flag me down, I'll get you in order.
Hi, I have a question about how this might relate to recent voucher bills passing and things of that nature. Because from a parent perspective too, if you know that a takeover is pending for the district and now you have these vouchers at play, how might that impact enrollment overall at Fort Worth ISD? And how can all of those variables impact the success of a takeover? And I'm not sure who the best person for that question is, but I guess
I
open.
don't know that I'm the best person, but I certainly have had a lot of experience with, I think that with regard to voucher, I'm not trying to circumvent what you're asking, but competition for public schools has been happening for many, many years. And I think that right now, maybe vouchers just highlights that aspect of public education. Back in 2010 and 2011, that was the first time that teachers were actually riffed, that they were fired due to financial exigency. That never had happened before in Texas in the current, in this time, certainly in the 25 years that I've been in education, that had never happened before and had never happened to the people before me. So we went through a big change then. And then, like you can look back and charters have been around for quite some time. And even though they're public schools, there's still competition to the K-12 public school. And now vouchers just presents a different form of competition. So I think going back to what Mr. Beasley was saying, advocating for student success, which I have dedicated my life to, is important. Starting with Samantha and everyone in her classroom, actually starting with Trenace and all the parents, because I'm a parent first as well. And my child went to Fort Worth ISD schools and, came here from Houston area as a 7th grader. So it was a big, big change for us, but it was probably the best thing that could have happened. And so I think that I don't want, and this is probably a Cynthia Rincon thing. I don't even know if it's O'Hanlon, Demerath, and Castillo. I don't want schools to get caught up on the voucher as much as they do what's going on good for kids in the classrooms, because they don't control the voucher, but they control what they can give to kids. They control who they hire. They control who they keep. And even with a commissioner takeover, they still have control at the very lowest level of how people talk to kids the minute they get on the bus, the minute they get off the bus, the minute they walk into schools. And I don't want school districts to lose sight of that piece, no matter whether there's a takeover or not, no matter what the legal framework is or not, no matter whether voucher money is taken from the public funding or not. What we do as educators from the moment our kids get to us and the moment they leave us is probably still the most important thing that should be focused on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to respond to the question about vouchers before we move on?
Take me, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Ms. Stimson, thank you for dedicating your career to serving our kids. You talked about the changes that have taken place in the classroom, but just to be clear, these are changes that Dr. Molinar has instituted since she's been superintendent. And as you know, this has been a good year for kids, but you are talking about, she's instituted some dramatic changes. So that is what you were talking about, Dr. Molinar's changes.
So from my understanding, the curriculum that we've been given, even for this year, we started out doing one thing, and then we were told about halfway into the first semester to start doing something else, which was those scripted PowerPoints, those scripted lessons down to the very minute, what to say, what to expect, and that sort of thing. I don't necessarily know if that came from downtown specifically. I just know that with the prospect of the takeover, we've already been told that the curriculum that we're using is similar to the curriculum that Houston is using with their takeover. So
Okay.
I may not
Anyway,
be the
I
best,
just wanted to-
but yeah.
You are talking about Dr. Molinar's changes at the present time.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've experienced in my classroom, because I'm upper grade. I'm not necessarily the English 1s and English 2s of the world. But from what I've been told from my other teachers, that yes, those are those changes.
Let me just say that going to a scripted learning process, this is not the first time that we've seen this in the Fort Worth ISD. We have seen changes over many years that were supposed to be directed towards the benefit of children. I have seen previous superintendents remove the ability to teach reading through a phonics-based curriculum and shift it towards what has been called a whole language approach. Or that doesn't necessarily take into consideration the way children of limited means learn. It has been proven over many, many years that phonics is the way to teach inner city kids how to read. When that was taken away, then the results that we as a community got relating to our children's ability to read were abysmal. I agree with the parent representative. I'm sorry, I can't read your name from here. This should be about our children and not about the power games that adults play about who's going to be in control and how that control is going to be exercised. It ought to be about what is best to teach our children how to read. Ms. Stimson, when they get to you, if they can't read, you're in high school. When they get to you, if they can't read,
They can't pass the STAR test.
they cannot process what you're trying to teach them. They can't do math. They can't do a darn thing. Reading is the core to all of this. Yes. And our children cannot read.
Do we have something from the internets?
So we have from Melody Johnson, to anyone who's able to answer, is the current statute imposes broad and deep change if imposed on an entire district. So this is based on the performance of a single school, not the entire school district. So has there been any thought regarding the disparity of impact on districts. In other words, Houston ISD with over 200,000 students and 200 schools is held to the same standard as a district with 2,000 or 3,000 students and 4 or 5 schools. So the question is whether the criteria should be re-examined for perhaps separate schools versus separate districts. So whoever is able to answer that is fine.
I mean, I know the question about why do the whole district versus when it's one school. I think I went to all of the community meetings that TEA had, and their answer to that is we look at is the problem here a single school problem where if we close this school that solves the problem for the district, or is it a systemic problem where we have low performance across the district? And so, what they would answer that by saying, what we saw here is widespread low performance across the district. So that's why they approached it the way they did. The question about different sizes of school districts is kind of a different thing, but.
I want to share something about, but it's not specifically to this question. It's more about the last question. So I don't think anyone would disagree that when we think about schools, that it should be about the children. I don't think there's anyone that would disagree with that. I think it's really hard, though, to say that for communities of color, and specifically talking about Black communities and Latino communities, that the reason why we have education for those children is because their communities fought for that education. The reason why we get funding for those children is because the communities fought for education. And what my research actually teaches me is that when you fight for desegregation, when you fight for more resources for your schools, that's when the state comes in and takes over your school district. So I think historically, we have to pay attention to that the fight for children, they don't fight it by themselves. Their communities have historically fought for them. And so we need to include that's an important context when we're thinking about what is right for our children, is that what is right for them is right for their communities. And when you say to the community, you no longer have a say, we are going to determine what's right for your kids, in my view, is highly problematic.
I just want to add that for a long time, we have not had a say in our communities or in our kids' education. I think education is the only, as a parent, I'm the consumer for my child's education. But this is the only place where I don't get a final say. If I go and eat at McDonald's and I don't like it, I can give it back and say, I don't like this, I want something better. This is the same thing we want for our kids' education. We don't like where our kids are right now. We want something better. However it's done, we need something better for our kids. Our kids do not have years and years and years to continue to sit in a system that's failing them and get a second chance. My daughter is a sophomore this year, who is a student in Fort Worth ISD, who I will say there's some amazing things going on in Fort Worth ISD. However, she does not get a second chance to be a sophomore. So we have to get it right now. I also have a first grader. She only gets one time in being a first grader. We have to figure this out from the adult level so that our kids are reaping the benefit, because they're the ones that the end game who is struggling the most. And so I disagree with the fact that when communities come together, that's when the state comes in. Like, all communities need to come together for our kids, because we have to be the voices for our kids. And this is not political. This is not about any adults in the room. This is about doing the right thing and educating kids who will eventually be the leaders of our city. We got to get it right for them, regardless of what that is and how that looks.
Hello, I am a 3L student, met you guys earlier. But my question, well, before I go into that, I agree with Ms. Dorsey-Hollins that change is terrifying. I was an educator for 9 years before pivoting to law school, and luckily it worked out. But the context was more in terms of what sometimes it worked out for me, but what's the backup to the backup plan? Community-wise, procedurally, and legally, what happens if this takeover follows the pattern of the other schools that Dr. Morel was talking about, and we don't reach those successful results for our kids, what is our pivot point at that?
I don't know that we can say the legal pivot point, because ultimately there's not a deadline, a timeline within the statute with regard to takeovers. And that's why I go back to what I said about what we can control as a community, as parents, as teachers, as educators, because it doesn't, if you're talking about getting rid of the power games and about who's in charge, you know, that can change almost, it changes every trustee election when a new trustee comes in. It changes every time trustees change offices, because the president who isn't the president anymore becomes a trustee and has a different perspective and often has a different take on things. And the trustees that are president now have a different take on things, and they run it a little differently. So I would say that right now there isn't anything in the law that tells you how long you can wait and see, you know, is there a takeover of the takeover if after 5 years? No, that's not there. And that's why I think it's important to know this is what it is. So now how do we continue to focus on kids and what kids need, and how do we continue to do the right thing for kids, no matter who's sitting at the table?
It's my job to get us out of here by 1. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to say something briefly at the end. So we only have 5 minutes. So can we just let Ms. Stimson, we'll start with you, but we've got, if you just keep it to a minute or less for everybody, and then we'll be able to finish. Yeah.
Brief. I guess for me, I'm going to keep doing what I know is best for kids so that we can continue to see those successes, because our kids are capable of success. There's no doubt in my mind where, you know, that isn't an obtainable goal for them. They have that ability. So I'm going to continue to wake up and go to work and do what's best for kids. That's all I can say for my end.
I think that's important to recognize. As I just said, we are where we are. And so I do want to take a moment to just again recognize the service of the Fort Worth ISD Board of Trustees, of Dr. Karen Molinar and the work that she's done as superintendent. But I also understand that we have to acknowledge the role of the commissioner in the TEA and where we are now with regard to the next phase of governance for Fort Worth ISD. And I hope that the focus must remain on supporting the continued success and academic progress of the students of Fort Worth ISD in this new structure.
The research is pretty clear about the number one factor increasing school performance. Does anybody want to take a wild guess? What? No. 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 Nope. Funding.
Mm-hmm.
Money. Resources. Who said that? Yes. 44th in the country. Funding is the number one factor predictor of increasing academic gains. Number one. And yet, one of the richest states is 44th. So while we're talking about taking over a school district, the board of managers, the parents, the students, we're not talking about what is going to lead to truly improving not just Fort Worth ISD, but Houston and every other school district that is struggling, right? And so the last thing I would say about this is we're at a law school, and so I have a plea for all, you know, our law professors, our judges who are in the room, and aspiring lawyers and law professors. We have to think critically about the law and really think how we can, within the law profession, really help communities deal with these types of harms that are encountering. From my perspective, and you might be thinking differently, there's no reason, in my view, that if you have a district with 140 schools and one school, one school was deemed underperforming. And even that one school, there's legal grounds to say maybe that they shouldn't have been considered underperforming. That out of 140 schools, one school is underperforming and the whole city loses their democratic rights because of that. It's just, to me, and you might disagree, to me, that doesn't seem right. And that's a legal question and a political question, but since we're in a law school, I put it forth as a legal question that we should do better. Yeah.
I'll make mine brief. I would just say continue to stay engaged. This process is not going to be around forever. So when our appointed board rolls back to our elected board, we're going to need passionate people who have been in the know, who know what's going on to apply for those seats. Not saying that our current board members won't, but this is how, as a community, we can make sure that we're staying engaged now more than ever. We need it.
I wish we lived in a city where we only had one underperforming school. But we have many schools that are underperforming. I mean, with the whole district is 30-something% of kids at grade level.
But the takeover was because of one school.
Right. Yeah. But that's what the law. Yes. Yeah. Professor Moran.
No, first of all, I wanted to thank this terrific panel. I hope you learned as much as I did today and enjoyed it as much as I did today. Let's have a huge round of applause. And I also wanted to thank Texas A&M University School of Law for enabling us to have this event, all the people who made it possible. And I also want to acknowledge the American Bar Foundation, who provided funding as well to support this event. Now, I hope our panelists can stay briefly to talk to you a little bit more before we head off to a nice lunch we're giving them to reward them for their terrific performance. This is not an underperforming panel. This I can tell you. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.